The lie my parents kept for 25 years. The words hang over the house like a coat left on a chair, familiar, heavy, impossible to ignore. But in that moment, under the chandelier's cold light, the lie isn't the loud thing. The loud thing is a small animal sound, a child's keening breath, and the sudden, brutal rush of panic that makes a grown woman taste copper on her tongue. "Get your hands off my son now." Elias's voice is a shot through the tile, not quite composed, all edges. He moves first, and everyone else in the foyer moves with him, like a school of fish reflexively parting. The boy in the center, 9 years old, a thinness under his collarbone from too many nights alert, clings to the only thing he knows how: teeth. The maid holds her forearm to her mouth, palm damp with blood, eyes wide not with accusation, but with a steady, almost stupid calm. Amara's fingers curl, not to pull away but to support, to keep the boy from tearing himself apart. Nathaniel's mouth is raw. He had bitten because something hit him in the dark, an echo, a smell, a voice from another life, and the bite surprised even him. The world blurs, marble floors, the glitter of the portrait corridor, a red paper heart card on the top step, damp from a dropped cup. The chandelier throws a dozen miniature suns across polished wood. A single tear leaves a clean track across Amara's cheek. Elias bends, not with rage now, but with a kind of stunned, hollowed-out recognition. His hands are big, as if sized for lifting chests, not for suing the open, raw places of a child. "Nathaniel," he says, voice breaking on the name, and the boy unhooks his jaw, like something physical releases. The teeth slack, the fight gasps out of him, and he collapses at Elias's knees into a heap of sobs. Inside Amara there is a slow, knowing compassion, not the bright heat of rescue, but the steady, relentless warmth of someone who has been near broken things for a long time. "It's okay," she murmurs. Her arm as she lifts it looks like every bruise she has ever tended. She doesn't flinch from the blood. She tucks Nathaniel's hair back with one hand and presses a damp towel to her own wound with the other. Her smile is not theatrical. It's small, like a match held to fog. For a long breath, none of them speak. The house holds its own economy of silence. The portraits lean a fraction. The grandfather clock ticks like a patient but indifferent judge. Rosa kneels in the background, hands folded like a prayer she can't finish. Hector stands with the kitchen keys in his palm, the metallic sound a small, irrelevant clink. Elias's apology is a fog of words, not so much to Amara as to the ground, to the fact that he's been terrified and therefore sometimes cruel. I'm sorry," he says, and there's shame in how quickly it arrives. He had come home expecting obedience, a timetable of calm, a child who learned to be quiet on command.
He had not expected the sight of his child attacking someone else, or the way his own blood surged, not with fury, but with a desperate urge to hold, to make something right. Later, when the maelstrom thins to ordinary navigation, the wiping of mouths, the small detritus of an emergency, Elias finds the red heart card. It sits under the glossy welcome mat like a child's sunken promise. On the inside, in awkward, looped handwriting, a message reads, "You are loved. Please do not be afraid." The signature is an initial, I. Elias's fingers find the crease, and the paper tears a little. The card is designed for a kindergarten class, the kind you buy in bulk, but now it feels like contraband from another life. That night, after the child has finally found sleep with his back against Elias's chest, and the house has gone softer around them, Amara lets her own bandage breathe. "You didn't have to be so hard on him," she says. Not accusing, just a line thrown across the quiet to find purchase. He looks up at her, and for a moment the entire history of his life, on walls, in dinners, in a succession of people who kept things neat so he didn't have to, spills into his face. "I don't know how to be anything else," he admits. The sentence tastes like defeat and like a confession. Amara's laugh is thin and immediate. "Neither did I at first," she says. She tells him, softly, about the first boy she cared for in another house, how he would hide under the linen table and only took comfort when she read by the light of a lamp. "You start where you start," she says. "You keep coming." The morning after, there's a small ritual that begins to stitch itself into the day. Elias leaves a porcelain mug of coffee, black, untouched, on the side table.
Amara brings a bowl of oatmeal with brown sugar for Nathaniel and a plate of peeled oranges. In the sun, the magnolia outside the dining room window blooms like an impossible slow fire. Nathaniel touches a petal, then smiles, the first fragile kind that looks like a tentative truce with the world. They start the flashcards because it's something that feels safe and mechanical and therefore possible. Scenes of their afternoons fold into each other, a kitchen table turned into a classroom, a stack of colored cards with letters and animals, Elias misreading hippopotamus and laughing until he coughs, Nathaniel correcting him solemnly. Amara sits by the back door on a chipped wooden chair, knitting a scarf she says she will never wear because she makes them for the act of making. Her presence is quiet, the kind of patience that doesn't seek reward but gets it anyway. A boy who allows his knees to brush hers, a hand that stops skittering like a frightened animal. These small acts do something like rebuilding. They don't erase the nights Nathaniel wakes with a scream, or the days when a sharp sound makes him recoil.
They don't fix the fact that there are pictures on the hallway wall that suggest lineage and order and a clean, respectable past. But they create a series of small intimacies that, over a week, become scaffolding. Not everyone in the house welcomes the change. Vanessa Fields is a clinician contracted by Elias's office, clean-cut, precise, her paperwork arranged like armor. She visits in the afternoons with a digital tablet under her arm and an expression that reads curiosity, edged with professional skepticism. She is good at assessing behaviors, at citing studies that map trauma and response. Her voice is steady. Her reserve is not unkind so much as efficient. "I need to see consistency," Vanessa tells Elias in his study one afternoon, the wall of books behind her a neutral, blunted background. "We can't have staff doing therapist's work. Attachment is a slow process. It can't be enforced." Her hands fold into her lap, clinical as a folded chart. To her, boundaries are methods, and methods are how you measure success. Elias hears the words and feels both flattered and exposed. He wants to tell Vanessa that he's already done the math of consistency. Early mornings, injections of attention, private tutors, chauffeurs who never see the boy cry. He wants to say that money has a way of covering mistakes, but not the empty spaces of a child's days. Instead, he nods, because he knows that paperwork and professional opinion are the things that often anchor social perception. "Of course," he says, "we will be careful." In the servants' wing, other currents run under the surface. Rena, the long-serving housekeeper, keeps her hands busy so her mouth can do work it shouldn't. She is meticulous in the way she folds sheets and in the way she sets the table, standards of order hiding a sharpened edge. Rena watched Amara's quiet acceptance and kept a ledger of slights only she could see. Spare towels left in the linen closet, coins on bedside tables, the way the new woman moved in the house as if she had always been there. "You let her do that," Rena says to Rosa one morning, voice low and syrupy. "The boy bites her, and still you let her hold him. Who does that help? Who does that make us look like?" Speed of accusation is slower in her mouth, a calculation of consequences and respect. Her watchfulness is not born entirely of malice. It's a small survival instinct worn as armor. People come into this house expecting order, not feelings. Rosa, who has worked with them for a decade and knows the soft architecture of loyalty, shrugs and replies in a manner that is both kind and pragmatic. "She is good with him," Rosa says. "He calms when she is near." Rena stiffens. People like her shift patterns. They ask questions. They get soft. And softness mixes with noise. Her finger draws an imaginary circle, as if describing the way things spread. Behind her, Hector shakes his head. He is the kind of man who measures danger in the way the light shifts at dusk. "We watch," he says. "We keep things safe. That's our job." And then the notices start. At first, it's small. An envelope slid beneath the back door with a single typed line on heavy paper. The page is blank, except for 4 words. "You don't belong here." The phrase is anonymous and mechanical and leaves a cold room where trust used to be. Rosa folds it twice and sets it on Amara's knitting basket like a thing to be discussed later. No one wants to call the police for a note that could be a prank or something worse. That night, the family's security monitors flicker with grainy images. A camera on the perimeter catches an SUV idling for a time on the far end of the drive, its headlights dimmed as if to avoid detection. The footage looks for several minutes and shows nothing more than a reflective figure in a raincoat moving toward the hedges before the car pulls away.
Whoever watches the house knows the schedule. Whoever wrote the note knows how easily words can be sharpened into threat. Amara believes in naming things too simply. It's a warning, she says, drawing the word like a line on the map. Elias, who has been operating in a different currency and language, responds with reinforced locks and a private security briefing. We'll increase patrols, he tells Rosa and Hector, and set a no-fly zone for gossip. His voice tries to be clever and ends somewhere between defiance and a man making a bargain with his own fear. But fear leaks into small corners. A sticker that had been on Nathaniel's bedroom window, a round, colorful decal with a cartoon owl, disappears overnight. The missing sticker is insignificant in other houses. Here it reads like a message. Nathaniel asks about it, words tumbling out of him with childlike logic. Did someone come in and take owl? He draws the owl on a sheet of paper with crayons, the eyes big and wary. Amara tapes the drawing to the inside of the door, a makeshift talisman. With each new incident, the house becomes a place that rearranges itself to accommodate watching. Staff start to move in pairs down the long servant corridors. Vanessa suggests cutting Nathaniel's playtime in the yard into shorter segments and increasing supervised interaction with adults trained in trauma response. Her suggestion is practical, but carries a bluntness that pricks at Elias. He prefers to imagine a world where presence alone, where a woman coming in daily and making stew, where flashcards and afternoon light could undo years of small abandonments. Vanessa, blunt and statistical, says presence must be measured and data-backed. Amara offers only examples. The boy who slept through the night after someone sang him a song. The child who spoke one whole sentence because a woman sat near him and did not leave. Rena watches all of this with a ledger of judgment.
She speaks quietly to the houseplants and the polished silverware as if they would confirm her suspicions. What if this woman is a trouble, she murmurs to herself one afternoon, tacking a small post-it note onto the underside of the pantry shelf with the words, "Keep eyes." That evening, when Amara takes too long arranging napkins, Rena gives a clipped comment about overstepping. "We all have our roles," she says. "We keep the house running. We don't become the family's feelings." Amara feels the pinpricks and keeps knitting. Her work with Nathaniel takes on a discreet intensity. She learns which light calms him, which steps in the hall he can take without flinching, the exact cadence of a phrase to coax him into naming a picture. Sometimes the breakthrough is a single syllable, whispered with no fanfare. Sometimes it is only the way he leans his head against her and allows the world to rearrange. These are not miracles. They are quiet, stubborn experiments in human connection. One afternoon, after a week of steady progress, Nathaniel does something he hadn't before. They are in the back garden. The magnolia has shed petals across the lawn and looks like frost even though the air is warm. Elias sits at the far edge, half in shadow, half in the bloom. He watches from his habitual distance, because parents who fear losing control learn to observe from the perimeter. Amara is on the ground teaching letter shapes, and Nathaniel rests his small palm in hers. He traces an A with his finger, then presses the other hand flat to the grass. For a breath, the world seems to hold as if listening. Nathaniel looks up and offers a small, genuine smile that reaches his eyes, like someone who had been rehearsing for a long time and finally remembered the right facial muscle to use. Amara feels it as warmth moves through her ribs. Elias watches, and something inside him rearranges. Not a blaze of revelation, but the slow accrual of a decision. This small life matters more than any pedigree or rumor could justify. But peace in that house is a fragile thing. With attention comes scrutiny, and with scrutiny comes those who find opportunity in fissures. The anonymous notes continue. The idle cars return to the perimeter at odd hours, and whispers begin to run through the town like thread. Social bulletins pick up on the scent of drama. Servers at the country club start raising eyebrows. Someone in a faraway office misprises a gossip column and forwards it with a snide emoji. The pattern is incremental. A phone call of silence, a neighbor's offhand question about the family's arrangements, a barista who remembers seeing a strange car idling near the estate. Elias's private life, which had been curated as carefully as the art on his walls, has a sudden porousness. Old friends start to avoid the house at dinner, as if scandal could stick by proximity.
He feels it as a new kind of exposure, the notion that secrets, once pulled free from their frames, will smear and run. Amara, who had once learned to live quiet, feels the pressure differently. Where Elias's concern reads like reputational damage, hers is practical. Who watches the boy when a stranger moves in the dark?
They decide to tighten the crew. Rosa and Hector remain close. They organize schedules to ensure someone is always nearby when Nathaniel is in the rondo of the house. Amara suggests a small camera pointed toward the back driveway, not intrusive, only to collect evidence should the car return. She tapes a single post-it to the monitor. Trust but see. It is the closest thing to a commandment she allows herself. Then, one late night, an envelope appears on the stone step in front of the drawing room, a thick one this time, heavy with more than paper. The seal is not broken when Elias picks it up. It is cold from having been left outside. He carries it inside and sets it on the dining table, where the chandelier spills over silverware and the red paper heart sits like a relic. He hesitates with his thumb at the fold. For a moment he sees his mother, for whom appearances had been an altar, and knows how the world will read whatever is inside. They open it together. The page inside is printed with a single sentence and a photograph tucked beneath the fold. The words are small and clinical. Some truths resist husband stories. The photograph is taken from an angle that suggests the person who made it wanted the subject to be undeniable. A tender exhale between two adults, caught in a half-remembered embrace, years ago. It's old film, coffee tint around the edges, and over it, in the margin, someone has handwritten a date. Elias looks at the image, and then at Amara, and then at the boy upstairs, and his hand trembles, not from fear alone, but from the knowledge that a history he thought compartmentalized has been made public in the most petty way possible. A mailed package, a small, mean thing designed to peel at legend. For a moment, the room tilts. He returns the paper to the envelope as if it might mend. Amara folds her hands together and leans closer, eyes on the photograph as if she can read the story and choose her side. They want you to look at that and feel small, she says. It's a statement and a refusal. Don't. He swallows and laughs once, a short noise that tries to push back the atmosphere of accusation. Who is they, he asks. It is a question he cannot answer. There is a logic to the scare. Secrets are power, and the removal of secrets is a weapon to be used. The envelope is both a threat and an invitation to panic. They could call the papers and say little. They could circle their wagons and pretend nothing. They could invite Vanessa to write a clinical response, or a press liaison to prepare a public statement. Each option has consequences. Transparency might spark rumors. Silence might look like admission.
In the end, they choose the small, private way that has been working. Keep Nathaniel's world steady. Rosa and Hector remove the envelope and lock it in the safe with other household relics. Elias burns the photograph later, in a fireplace that seems too antiquated an act to make sense in the age of hard drives and screenshots. The ash scatters, but the image, once digital or printed in the world, is hard to fully eradicate. The next morning, the tabloids do what tabloids do. An online column appears with a headline that teases a scandal but offers little proof. The gossip window is brief but loud. It brims with implication and empty promises of exclusivity. A sidebar asks if Nathaniel's lineage is part of a larger family quarrel. The article cites an anonymous source and then moves on to other amusements. Vanessa reads it and clips the page into Nathaniel's file. Scandal complicates therapy, she murmurs. Her voice is all method. Her expression is guarded. It will change the perimeter of trust. To her, the story is another data point to manage. To Amara, it is a different kind of wound. The world is trying to tell their story without them. Small frictions that had lived under the surface begin to harden. Rena becomes colder in her service, folding linens with an extra edge in the crease. She is careful to keep her distance. Once, when Amara catches Rena's eye across the garden, the older woman's face is a map of resignation and something else, fear that her own loyalty might be called into question. At night, Nathaniel wakes sometimes, and Elias goes to him. The boy clings and asks questions that adults fear to answer. Is he my father? Did Mama lie? The child has seen small things and read the way faces tighten and loosen. He knows that some truths are told in a glance rather than a confession. Elias sits on the edge of the bed and says what he is able. Not physics, not history, but the present. I am your father, he tells the boy. The phrase is not a legal claim as much as it is an offering. I will be here. Nathaniel presses the hollow of his face into Elias's palm and names a word for the first time that is not calculated. Stay. Elias promises, in a way he has rarely promised before, not with contracts and not with wealth, but in the stubborn, tired voice of someone willing to be present when the house shakes.
When they go downstairs the next morning, the sense of being watched has turned to resolve. They are not naive to the fact someone is trying to pull at the threads of their lives. They are tired of being reagents to a rumor mill. Amara takes Nathaniel's hand, and the three of them move as a unit through the kitchen. The red heart card sits on the counter as if daring the world to disagree. But the envelope, the note, the picture, they are wedges driven between the boards.
More than that, they are a promise that someone is willing to make the private public, and once that threshold is crossed, the house cannot return to its earlier hush. The lie that had been tended in quiet, 25 years of small decisions, omissions, a lineage maintained like an heirloom, has begun to creak under the attention. And attention, once it finds a seam, is a fastidious thing. It returns not always loud, but in increments. A late-night call of silence, a friend who stops showing up at dinner, a voicemail that begins with an odd apologetic intonation before hanging up. Someone, somewhere, is turning pages of the past to find useful things. Amara's strategy is simple and stubborn. Keep building. Keep offering the small routines that make Nathaniel's day predictable. Keep learning the space between his ribs. Keep showing up when he needs a steady hand. She speaks to him with spare, practical language. "We're here," she says when his breath catches in the night. "You are not alone." For Elias, the problem grows more complicated, because every time someone whispers about lineage, they are whispering about the foundation of how he defines his life: inheritance, name, legacy. He has always assumed his own history was a sealed book. Now, faced with questions, he must decide what to guard and what to open. The house that has been curated like a museum of his choices must now behave like a home under siege. At the end of a long week, as dusk gathers against the windows and the magnolia sheds the last of its petals, a car pulls up to the drive with more purpose than the previous passers-by. It parks some distance off, lights off. A figure descends, slow and deliberate. Someone watches from a dark seat and steps forward with a confidence that suggests old familiarity with the house, with its rhythm and its people. The person leaves nothing but a single thing on the porch, a black card with one word printed in small caps, no flourish, no signature. Open. Elias picks up the card, feels the fiber of it under his thumb. He thinks of all the things that have been open to the house lately: gossip, rumor, photographs, the fragile banner of a child's smile. He thinks of the 25-year seam that had kept certain edges hidden. The card is both threat and invitation. He puts it in his pocket, in the exact compartment where he keeps bills and old receipts, and walks back into the house with a man who is learning, slowly and sometimes painfully, that presence may be the only answer he can offer when past and blood demand to be known. And somewhere, a camera blinks in the dark, capturing the way the man folds the card, and the light catches the dust in his hair. The house leans in its bones, as if listening for whether the word on the card will be obeyed. If this scene hooked you, and you want to see how the truth unfolds, and what happens when secrets are pulled into light, leave a like and subscribe. There are more pages to this story, and the next one will push them all further toward a decision they did not ask for. They do not yet know who left the card. They do not yet know the full extent of the past that will be emptied into the hallway like a suitcase, but the first fissure is made. The days that follow are a slow burn of small investigations and quieter defenses. Elias orders the security footage for the night the car idled. Rosa and Hector patrol the garden with torches that catch the dew on spiderwebs. Amara sits with Nathaniel and teaches him a new game: name the thing that makes you feel brave. He says the lamp at first, then the scarf, then uncertainly, Amara. She puts the scarf around his shoulders and knots it like a promise. Vanessa suggests a measured PR response: no statements, minimal engagement, steady routines. Her advice is to reduce the oxygen the rumor breathes. Elias, who understands performance as much as he does presence, wonders which is more important: to be present quietly at home, or to manage the story in the wide world. He chooses both, because indecision in this house has consequences. As the week progresses, the intrusions increase in both boldness and creativity. Someone replaces the carved horse on the front gate with a similar horse painted in cheap spray paint, mismatched and brittle.
The sticker on Nathaniel's window, a child's owl, reappears in a different shade and stuck crooked, as if to mock the original. A chunk of the garden fence is found kicked in, not enough to get a person through, but enough to announce an intention. At night, Amara sits in a chair by the nursery and reads aloud the only kind of book Nathaniel will allow, an atlas of places he's never been. She traces countries with a finger and imagines a life that is both freer and more complicated than the one he has. In her voice, there is a steadying cadence. She describes the ocean as if it is a friend, and the mountains as something to climb with your back packed with courage. Nathaniel listens, and for short moments, forgets the sound of being watched. Hector finds a scrap of paper under the maple tree one morning, with a drawing of a man and a baby and 2 names written beneath them, 2 names connected by a line. Hector does not know what names would mean, but he knows it is a message meant to be read. He takes the scrap to Elias and puts it on the table like an accusation. "Who would write that?" Elias asks, but the question is a stranger. He has always known secrets can be weaponized. He just didn't expect them to come in the neat little packages of hand-scribbled notes and crooked stickers. Rosa, who has lived by steady loyalty, starts tilting toward decisive support. "We gather evidence," she says quietly. "We do not act on roar." Her counsel is the role of anyone who has seen storms before. Keep records, keep names, keep the child safe.
Amara suggests an odd, small ritual to shield Nathaniel's daily path. They make a small booklet of safe places, room names, people to call, code words. It is not legal strategy. It is a child's map out of fear. Nathaniel draws each person with a thick crayon and colors them solid. Rosa with oversized glasses, Amara with a scarf, Elias with a tie drawn as a big, warm loop. He tapes the booklet inside his closet. On another afternoon, when the light hits the painting linseed, Elias receives a phone call from a distant cousin he had not heard from in years. The cousin speaks carefully, like someone testing thin ice. "Is everything all right?" she asks, and Elias hears the sentence for what it is. Rumor recycling down family tree, a way for history to knock on his door and ask for admission. He sits in his office, the photograph of his late wife on the mantel looking like a listener who can't speak back. He presses his forehead to his hand and thinks of her laugh, the way she used to fold the napkins into swans for dinner guests. He imagines the 25 years that had layered like sediment, a pattern of choices, loyalty, protective omissions. The thought stings, that those omissions might now be counted as lies, that the architecture of a life might crumble not because of what was done, but because what was left unspoken now wants to be said. At dusk, in the kitchen with a pot of soup simmering, Amara finds another note, a torn piece of a typed page shoved between the pots, with 3 lines left visible, as if the rest had been removed. The fragment reads, "Never told him," and another line that ends in, "always kept." Whoever left it wanted to prick the sense of continuity. Amara folds the slip and puts it with the others. She does not show it to Nathaniel. What neither of them fully understands yet is the shape of the enemy, a person who knows the household well enough to send curated pieces of unease instead of wholesale terror, someone who believes destabilization is more effective in small, sapping increments. It is a tactic meant to make people doubt what they thought unshakable. And so they respond in small, practical accelerations. Security cameras reposition, the driveway is lit like a runway, phone numbers are exchanged and cross-checked. But practical measures do not soothe the soul's unease. That is a job for other things: stories, human presence, repetition of care. Amara continues to show up, to braid Nathaniel's hair in the mornings even though he's old enough to do it himself. Elias starts going on the longer drives with him because it is a neutral activity. A man and his son, window down, the country air like an eraser. Yet at night, Elias dreams old architecture, a family tree coming loose, rings of ancestors slipping off one by one. He wakes with the taste of ash and the red heart card folded under his pillow like a talisman that might still work if he believes it hard enough. One morning, as the house grooves into its new normal, a local reporter calls and asks a question that makes Elias's jaw tighten. "Is it true that Mr. Blackwell's family has a long-standing secret?" the reporter asks, voice tuned like someone smelling a story. The question is perfunctory but loaded. Elias hears Caroline's laugh from the party line of the past. Secrets are what make people interesting. He hangs up without answer. The house continues to breathe, but now each room is lined with the possibility of exposure. The lie that had been kept for 25 years is no longer only a private arrangement. Rumor and evidence are colliding like tectonic plates. People in town choose sides based on the most convenient narratives. Some defend the family as if defending an altar. Others lean into the deliciousness of scandal. None of it, however, understands the child at the center. Nathaniel, who is 9 and who thinks in simple metaphors, does what children do. He tries to measure the storm in ways he can control. He asks if he can plant seeds in the garden, and then wonders aloud whether seeds remember the hands that plant them. Amara listens and says, "Seeds remember steady hands," because she knows the truth of it. You water them, you wait, and sometimes, against the odds, things grow. The days spool into weeks. The press interest flickers like an unreliable flame. The sting is not constant, but unpredictable, the worst kind. A dinner guest may arrive and mention at random that they heard something, and the conversation tilts. Friends decline invitations with crafted excuses. Rena, whose loyalty had long been transactional, grows quiet and withdrawn, until the house feels emptier, smaller, less safe. And in the midst of it, small acts of rebellion keep the world from closing. Amara bakes a loaf of bread and leaves it on the counter for the boy to find. Elias takes him to a museum and lets him stand too close to a sculpture, hands hovering like a benediction. Rosa sings an old hymn in the laundry room as she folds sheets, a human sound that stitches seams. Each is a tiny refusal to allow their private world to fold under the weight of an external telling. But then, on a morning when the sky is a thin smear of silver, a new element arrives at the gate. A black SUV that doesn't idle at the edge of the drive this time, but arrives with purpose. The driver leaves a single object on the hood of Elias's Maserati, then turns and leaves without a face to associate with the gesture. It is a photograph, larger than the other ones, a meticulous print that bears a truth seamed into its corner, a date, a face half obscured, a handwriting that suggests calculation. Hector finds the photograph sitting like a dare on the car, and brings it in with the reverence of someone who has seen other people's battles. The image is too clear to be coincidence. It was meant to be seen, to spark recognition, to rearrange memories.
Elias takes it in, breathes, and feels his life narrowing to the size of whatever is on that paper. Amara watches him as he studies the photograph, the light catching under his eyes. She does not need to ask. She knows that wherever this goes, it will test their very definition of family. For Nathaniel's sake, she thinks, not for any other reason. The house must hold, must be steady. When the phone buzzes on the mantel with the first line of a text from an unknown number, Elias is not surprised. He picks up and reads a message that is precise and cold. Some truths must be told. The words are an oven that has gotten too hot. The family is now engaged not only with rumor and image, but with someone determined to convert private shame into public proof. Elias sets the phone down and looks at Amara. "They won't stop," he says. It is a statement with the hard ring of certainty. "No," she replies. "Then we must hold better." He folds the photograph into the safe anyway, because there are few options left that feel useful. He knows that burning a photograph in the fireplace means nothing if someone has already scanned it. He understands that the next move will be expensive or cunning, or both. His past lessons about privacy, about inheritance, have left him with tools that are good at protection, but slow at tenderness. The house remembers everything. Its walls have ears only in the metaphorical sense, but tonight, in the foyer, the marble seems to remember the footsteps of the men who laid it. The chandelier remembers dinners in toasts. The red heart card remembers a child's attempt at language. The lie that had been kept for a quarter century begins to take on a new shape as the truth edges in like winter. They do not yet know which part of that truth will be the lever that upends them. They do not yet know who will read the photograph and know its meaning. They only know that someone else knows something and has decided the world should also be told. The house holds its breath, as if anticipating a storm. Outside, the magnolia petals fall in slow, steady handfuls. Inside, a child dreams of oceans. A woman knits a scarf she says she won't wear. A man burns a photograph and still cannot forget the image it held. And on.
And on the day the brother returned, the house felt smaller. The halls remembered a kind of breath that had once been measured and tidy. Now the air moved like someone had opened a window in winter and left it there. Simon Blackwell arrived in a suit that fit like a promise. Soft, expensive, the lapels catching light in a way that made him look, briefly, immune to the unease he'd been sent to stir. He did not come with a shout. He came with a photograph on the hood of Elias's Maserati and a measured knock at the front door, the sort of knock that suggests you have always been invited. Rosa opened it because she had always been the person to answer. Simon's smile was small. His eyes were practiced warmth.
"Elias," he said, as if they were in a private room and not the center of a house that had been holding its own breath for weeks. "We need to talk." They let him in. He moved through the foyer with a light that suggested memory more than malice, as if he were stepping into a room where he had once belonged. He spoke to the staff by name, with the easy familiarity of a man who'd been absent enough to be interesting and present enough to be felt. He made a joke about the chandelier. Someone laughed and felt foolish for it later. Simon did not waste time with small talk. When they reached Elias's study, he placed a thick envelope on the desk with a reverence that felt calculated. He did not slide it. He laid it flat, as if it were fragile, then watched Elias pick it up. The room was quiet, and the grandfather clock sounded long and patient. "You've been busy," Simon said. "You keep everything polished." His voice had neither remorse nor cruelty. It was a kind of chaplain's cadence, comforting to the unready. Elias slid his thumb under the fold. Inside was a clipped chain of DNA report pages, the language of science printed in sober type, plus a short note in Simon's hand. For what it's worth. The print spelled out a conclusion that was small and terrible in its flatness. A biological tie confirmed. Simon watched as Elias read, as he had read the other items that had been left to prick him, photographs, anonymous notes, watching for reaction, measuring the arithmetic of surprise. There was a long, thin moment in which the house folded to their breathing. Nathaniel's name hung from the chandelier like something half-written. The staff shifted. Amara sat in the nursery, fingers white-knuckled around a knitting needle that had not clicked for the past hour. Simon did not let the silence go wasted. He spoke then, and his words were a slow lever. He spoke of blood as if it were a currency, and of restitution as if it were an obligation. He spoke of rights, and of the way the world loved clear categories, how the press loved a lineage laid out in stark type. "This changes things by the numbers," he said. "Not everything people claim as family is grounded in biology, but the law." He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. The suggestion hung like a threat spelled without exclamation. Elias's reaction was not theatrical. There was no collapse, no grand denial. He felt, as a man who had spent years curating a life of clean surfaces, the old reflex of containment. Tidy this, tidy that, sweep it under. He folded the paper and set it back into the envelope. He stood, but he did not at first look at his brother. "Why now?" Elias asked. The question was not only to Simon, but to the past itself, to decisions made in another era, to omissions kept against the smoothness of a life. Simon smiled the way people do when you want you to feel as though the answer is obvious, because some things ferment.
And because some people think the truth is owed to the child. He leaned forward, and for a moment, the brotherly thing was almost tender. "I didn't want to be the one to force this, Elias, but the child—" He let the sentence dangle. It felt like it needed someone to step up. What Simon framed as duty read to Elias like performance. The manner in which the envelope had arrived, the photograph on the Maserati, the notes, the anonymous seeds of doubt, unfolded a pattern. It was not simple confession. It was manufacture. It was a plan that had the smell of old money and newer resentments. Amara stepped forward then, because she had been holding the string of her own courage for a long time. She had been the woman who had cleaned a wound and stayed. She walked with the attention of someone who knew how fragile a child's trust could be, how a single shift could reseat a child's world. "You don't get to weaponize him," she said, voice low and clear. It was not a litany. It was a line in the sand. "You don't get to make him into an argument." Simon looked at her, as if measuring the worth of the sentence for his narrative. "This isn't about you," he replied smoothly.
This is about truth. Truth for whom? She answered. For the tabloids? For your need to be seen as noble? He is 9. The truth doesn't deputize you to make him a political object. For a beat, Elias watched the exchange, as an outsider might watch two currents meet. The choice that had been coming for months now sat in the room like a live wire. Simon's presence was a lever meant to unseat them. He could have called the staff together. He could have taken Nathaniel from the house by force or legal threat. Instead, he held up the sheet of paper as if it were a redeemer. Elias put the paper back in the envelope with fingers that had known other kinds of authority. He folded the envelope into his palm and finally looked at his brother, truly looked, as if seeing a stranger who had learned the right shape of familiarity. Parenthood is not an invoice, he said quietly. His voice was not for the cameras he imagined were waiting at the curb. It was a bone-deep thing, the sentiment of a man who had chosen many small habitual acts over any sweeping title. It is presence. It's the nights you sit up when someone is sick. It's the way you listen to a child's nonsense on the drive home. It's the small obligations you keep when no one is looking. Simon took this in, and for the first time, a shadow passed across his face. He had rehearsed for a confrontation of leverage and entitlement. He'd not planned for a moral stand that refused his premise. "So you'll refuse to recognize your son," Simon said, with a smoothness that implied moral victory. "You will deny the blood when it is handed to you." Elias put the paper back in the envelope and pushed it across toward Simon, as if setting down a heavy thing to be collected by its owner. "No," he said. "I will not deny who he is."
I will not pretend evidence doesn't exist, but a biological tie does not replace the work of being a father. You can claim DNA and still be a stranger. There was a sudden tightness in Simon's jaw, the quick flinch of a man who had counted on simpler arithmetic. He took the envelope as if it burned. "You'll find it's not so simple," he said, and then he left words unspoken. The press, the law, social pressure. The public machine took no time. A week later, a tabloid that had once eaten dinner with city gossip ran a careful tease and then a full piece. Blackwell's scandal, a secret revealed. The piece used the language of evidence, even as it admitted unnamed sources, and it painted Simon as a repentant elder brother with a conscience. The local news picked it up, and a small storm circled overhead like vultures, then crows, then anything that wanted to be near a story. Vanessa felt the effects differently than the rest. To her, every external gust became another line in a chart. She tightened the file on Nathaniel and wrote recommendations that read like stabilizing instruction: keep routines, limit exposures, monitor supervision. In private, she told Elias that exposure had a cumulative effect, that even the best intentions can be undone by mounting social pressure. It was not cruelty, only a clinician doing her job, fixing the world into what could be measured. But the pressure leaked into other places that couldn't be measured. Invitations stopped arriving. People they had thought loyal became cautiously absent. Rena, who had been watching like a woman stoking earth, handed in her letter of resignation with a face full of complex sorrow. She did not want scandal. It threatened her own small world. "I can't be associated with a house where things are always being upended," she said, and in her voice was the sound of someone choosing survival over loyalty. For Elias, the world that had been lacquered with a single narrative, his marriage, his wife's memory, an image of continuity, was being chipped. The photographs on the wall looked like evidence, not memory. The household that had once felt like an extension of his choices now presented new accounts he didn't know how to answer, but had to. Amara, meanwhile, doubled down on ordinary work. She made soup, she taught. She learned to offer Nathaniel not only safety, but tools, how to name feelings, how to find a breath when panic rose. She learned, too, the political work of being close to a child who was becoming the center of rumor, how to sit in the nursery with the door open, how to answer a neighbor's casual question with a neutral smile. Her work was domestic and strategic, and quietly heroic. The campaign against them, if it could be called that, became more organized. Leaks surfaced, old letters, a photograph of a woman long dead, a rumor that the Blackwell lineage had been constructed on stories told in private rooms.
Someone had recruited local operatives to send notes, to leave images on cars, to place a photograph where it would be found like an accusation. The pattern grid mapped outward from Simon's entry point. Elias did what men with resources sometimes do. He summoned people who could trace the edges. Investigators with quiet shoes and patient graphs came to the house and sat with monitors, clicking through footage and archival accounts. They followed pen strokes, phone records, payments. What the investigators found did not restore the past. Instead, it exposed a network, the way whispers were bought, the way a narrative could be grafted onto images and sold as inevitability. In the gray map of those findings, a name recurred: Malcolm. He was a technician who had been used to turn a camera the other way, to plant a photograph, to buy a narrative and sell it as a secret. There were texts, recordings, payments, small sums layered through accounts designed to look like garden work or maintenance. When the investigators took the findings to local authorities, the response was methodical: an arrest. Malcolm was taken in for questioning related to the tampering and to the campaign of anonymous threats that had escalated into public defamation. He did not go quietly into the van. He kept his head high, as if scandal were a crown he had been paid to wear. No one pronounced definitive moral verdicts that night. Arrest does not mean truth is cleanly restored. But Malcolm's arrest slowed a machine. It cut off a set of practical lines. The person who had been paid to seed fear was no longer moving freely. The press that had been greedy for narrative now had to report an arrest that complicated the innocent curve they'd drawn. A paragraph here, a late-night correction there. Not exoneration, but an interference with the tidy arc of scandal. Simon reacted the way men who believe they are owed outcome react, with a mixture of recalibration and venom. He did not vanish. He shifted tactics, moving from photograph drops to public op-eds and private whispers to anxious allies. He offered interviews that shaped him as a man who had done the right thing by telling. He painted his actions with the colors of duty. Elias, for his part, made a different decision. He called a press conference, but it was not defensive. He stepped behind a podium with hands that had learned to hold small things steady. Beside him stood Amara, steady and quiet, not seeking the spotlight but refusing to be erased. Nathaniel sat with a scarf Amara had tied. He scrolled a small toy between his fingers and looked occasionally at adults who were speaking as if they were columns that might fall. Elias spoke in simple terms. He acknowledged the facts that could not be denied. He refused the lure of the drama that would make the child into a public object. "We will not be defined by the most salaciously framed headline," he said. "He is a child. He deserves to be known as a child first."
Then, as if to make the point real, Elias announced something he had been planning quietly in late hours: the Isabella Blackwell Foundation. It would be named for his late wife, the woman who had, in private ways, taught him how tenderness could be built into ritual. The foundation's first purpose, he said, would be to support caregivers and to fund programs for children whose lives had been complicated by secrecy and scandal. The speech was not a legal maneuver. It was a declaration of what he would rather invest in than fight. It was a redirection, from being the subject of rumor to being the provider of care. The announcement was both strategic and personal. It turned their narrative from reactive to proactive. It gave them a public gesture they could stand behind that was not only about defense. It tied them to work that could outlast the gossip. As cameras flashed, Amara felt a tide of something like hope press at the edge of her chest. She remembered the first red heart card and the child with a bite in his mouth, and she felt, as if across a field, the small connect of meaning, that presence could be made into policy and practice. The next months moved at the rhythm of investigation and repair. Media cycles tumbled and reassembled in new shapes. Malcolm's arrest was followed by hearings and interviews. The networks of who had been paid to do what were exposed in partial and messy ways. Names like Jared Kent and other intermediaries surfaced, men who had been conduits for a campaign that had cost little in dollars, but a lot in human mercy. Some of those names were confronted in staff meetings, in quiet questions over tea, in the way Elias asked for the truth of employees' involvement. People who had been coerced or paid to participate made choices. Some recanted, some were frightened into silence, some resigned. Rena left the house during this period. Her resignation was not a single, simple thing. It was a layered break. Fear, loyalty, the trade-off of survival.
On her last morning, she met Amara in the kitchen, hands wrapped like a book. "I won't say I was right," she told the other woman, voice stripped of the judge's edge. "I know now that people try to do good and get hurt. Take care of him." Her exit left a hollow in the house that took weeks to fill. Meanwhile, Amara kept doing what she always did. She was present in the small, stubborn way presence can be: a hand on a shoulder at night, a ritual of oatmeal at dawn, a game invented to teach patience. Nathaniel responded to this armor of care in small increments: a laugh that lasted longer, a sleep that stretched without nightmare, a drawing with a new sun in the corner. One afternoon in the garden, magnolia petals like confetti across the lawn, Nathaniel reached up and took Amara's face in his small hands. He did not ask for grand declarations. He did not demand proof.
He looked at her with a clarity that made her heart stop for a second, and said with a solemnity no 9-year-old should have had to carry, "Mama?" His voice was thin, the offer of a child testing a category. Time stilled in a way that belonged to the possibility of belonging. Around them, the house continued its work, silver being polished, cameras checked, schedules adjusted. But inside that small orbit, a truth settled that had nothing to do with papers or names. Love, care, and presence could be named and claimed by the child who needed them. Amara did not rush to the mantel for a certificate. She knelt. She touched his hair and let the title find itself between them. "If you want me to be," she said. The word she spoke was not a fix, it was an opening. He repeated it, the syllable like a charm, and then the rest of the house felt the way a room feels when someone opens the curtains to let light in. It did not fix everything. It did not undo the smear campaigns or the whispered doubts, but it created a private vocabulary that would, school by school, night by night, become a scaffold for healing. Their counterattack continued in quieter ways. Elias's investigators found threads that led to conspirators, men with grievances, men who had been convinced that a lineage mattered more than care. The evidence they gathered led to the exposure of schemes to plant narratives and to pay for them. Public attention that could have been a wrecking ball was redirected. Rather than chasing the tabloids into a spiral, Elias chose to fund structural response. The foundation launched a program for caregiver support and a legal fund for families targeted by smear campaigns, a blunt instrument of help against the weaponization of private lives. Malcolm's arrest was the turning point in public perception. The narrative that had been neat and explosive now looked messy and manufactured. It did not erase what the papers had printed, it reframed it. The town, which had loved a quick arc of scandal, began to tilt toward the quieter moral framing that presence and repair mattered more than gossip. Not everyone shifted. There were still those who chewed sermons of pedigree at dinner tables, but the energy of the rumor stuttered. When the foundation's first gala was held, the house shined for reasons that were not only about image. The chandeliers caught warm light, soft music threaded through the rooms. People gathered not simply to watch a family reconstitute itself in the public eye, but to commit money and attention to a cause that now had a face and a child as a testament. Nathaniel was there in a small suit, his scarf a bright knot around his neck. He had been nervous in the limo. He had worried about the people and the cameras. But when Amara walked in beside Elias and people saw the trio together, man, woman, child, the photographs that later circulated carried a different quality. Not accusation, but a slow claim.
When the gala ended and the lights were dimmed, a staff member pushed through the crowd to whisper that they had raised enough for the first set of programs. Elias signed ciphers and nameplates with a steadiness that suggested he had found a use for his guilt and his care. But the real scene from the evening was quieter. After the speeches, after the applause, Nathaniel slipped away from the adults and found a quiet corner. Amara followed, and the two sat on a low bank near a fountain that spilled its small silver tongue of water into a pool. He leaned against her and, in the way children do, offered her a small, decisive thanks. "You stayed." She pressed her forehead to his and let the world of small promises hold them. The truth that had been spread for 25 years, the ledger of omitted facts, had in many ways destroyed illusions. It had exposed old comforts as fragile. It had made rooms louder and pasts more porous. But the destruction loosened certain things too, the pressure to perform a lineage at the cost of a child's day-to-day safety. The truth, in exposing a lie, opened a far tougher openness, the work of building belonging honestly. After the gala, the foundation staff set up programs and policies. They met with therapists, with other parents, with people who had been the quiet backbone of families bruised by public rumor. They did not promise instant healing. They spoke openly about incremental work. They funded after-school programs that taught attachment skills and crisis management without turning kids into public stories. They did the plumbing of repair. Simon did not vanish entirely from the narrative. He continued to speak, to write op-eds, to argue that biology should have weight. But the force he had hoped to unleash had been redirected into a different kind of conversation, one that asked, often awkwardly and sometimes clumsily, what it means to parent when a child is vulnerable to public scrutiny. For some readers, Simon remained a hero. For others, he became an example of the way entitlement finds moral language. He was, like all complex men, both redeemed and unredeemed in the telling. Rena's resignation, strange as it felt at first, eventually resolved into a life she curated for herself. She wrote to Amara once, months later, with a careful note, "I was wrong to mistrust the new order. I have learned a different kind of mercy." It was not an absolution. It was a small human letter that felt like the ending of one chapter and the cautious beginning of another. Vanessa continued to counsel, always precise. She eventually published a clinical paper on attachment disturbances in high-exposure families, in which she quoted nothing specific and everything true, that presence, measured and steady, builds safety in ways that paperwork cannot. Her final scene in their arc was not courtroom drama. It was a clinical insight offered in quiet tones, a small victory for method over gossip.
Elias found himself changed, not by a single dramatic conversion, but by the slow arithmetic of days. He learned how to stay awake for a child who woke in the night, and to let the presence be more important than polish. He learned a new vocabulary for fatherhood that included apology, that allowed for imperfection. At the Foundation's first board meeting, he spoke simply and without flourish about what his wife's memory meant to him and why a child's need would be the center of their philanthropy. He did not try to buy back time. He tried to spend it well. And Nathaniel, who had arrived in the world with edges and a wildness and a bite, began to soften around the corners most people don't notice. The way he allowed someone to hold a spoon for him, the way he learned a joke and then laughed with it, the way he let a hand find his while crossing a dark parking lot. He still woke sometimes, and he still startled at noises. He learned to name the terror and then to name the person who would sit with it. In the wake of the storm, there was a sense that something had been destroyed and something else had been made possible. The lie that had been kept for 25 years, protected by reticence, by loyalty that had calcified into secrecy, had been pried open. The reveal did unmake certain illusions, tidy lineages, the pretense that appearances are sufficient. But in its unmaking, it also cleared a space where truth could be chosen rather than hidden. The family that emerged was not the one of the portraits. It was the stubborn, complicated thing that grows out of those who show up. Months later, as the Foundation settled into its work and the house learned new rhythms, a small ceremony took place. It was not a performance for the tabloids. It was a private Thanksgiving. Staff present, a few friends, the soft sound of a piano. Nathaniel, now a little more steady, put a paper heart he had drawn into a box labeled Promises. He handed it to Amara. She unrolled a scarf she had knitted during long nights and wrapped it around his shoulders. "You are not alone," she said, and the words were a promise worn like a scarf. He looked up at her with solemnity that had, in the whirlwind, kept something of the child's truth he had always carried. He took a breath like a vow and said with the fullest, simplest voice he had ever used toward her, "Mama." Elias sat nearby, hands folded, and watched the two of them. He felt the old ache, always there, but it was a different ache now. It carried with it relief and responsibility in equal measure. The lie that had been kept for 25 years had been pulled into light. It had destroyed the neat story they told about themselves, but it had also made room for choices that would not be about hiding, but about building.
When the last guest left that night, and the magnolia had finished dropping its petals, the house settled into a new hush. Not the hush of pretense, but the hush of people who had learned to be tender in public and quiet in private. The chandeliers reflected not only oil and gold, but the small, stubborn acts that over time would hold a child safe. This is, in the end, the strange arithmetic of truth. What destroys a comfortable fiction often clears the ground for more honest growth. The lie kept for 25 years did not vanish without consequence. It cracked the family's image, rearranged loyalties, and opened wounds that needed tending. But out of that rupture, presence found room to insist. Out of the hurt came a new definition of parenthood, one that refused to be reduced to blood tests and headlines, and instead insisted on the daily, unglamorous work of showing up. If this story has touched you, if the idea of chosen family and the work of presence resonates, leave a comment below about the person who stayed for you when it mattered most. Share this with someone who believes that parenthood is proven by presence, not pedigree.